In section 1, we learned about how and why people started to come over and how they were starting to be successful when they were coming over to the New World. And now we're getting into the 3 different major sections of where people settled. Section 2 is going to cover the New England colonies, and this is where they went north. Section 3 will cover the middle colonies, and section 3-4 will cover southern. So the northern colonies are basically made up of separatists and Puritans, and we're going to find out very quickly on the next slide the answer to that essential question. Why do they leave England to come to North America? And the Pilgrims, and not necessarily the Pilgrims that you learned about in kindergarten, the buckle hats and the hand turkeys, but Pilgrims that we know of, Pilgrims, all types of Pilgrims, what they do and why they come to America. That will be on the test. You'll have definitely the Great Migration, the first real large group of settlers coming to the New World. And then Squanto will also be an essay question, similar to how John Smith was an essay question in section 1. Squanto, how does he help people survive now in the northern part of the country where the conditions are a little bit more harsh? The conditions are way more cold and it's very difficult to grow food. So how does Squanto help them to survive when they get there? And this right here is your answer to why separatists and Puritans come to America. They're looking for religious freedom. They were looking to get away from persecution in England. These groups of people were having their lives be harassed for a variety of methods for believing in something that the king did not want them to believe in. So they would either be taxed heavily, they would be shunned from society, they would eventually, some of them could be murdered for what they believed in. And the Puritans and the separatists believe in separate stuff. The Puritans want to keep the church pure, which is really creative of them. Thanks to them for coming up with a really creative name. Puritans wanted to keep the church pure, and the separatists wanted to separate from the church. So those two groups of people, not so creative, but it works out for us because now you know exactly what they wanted. Puritans wanted to keep it pure, separatists wanted to separate. By the way, no buckled hats. No buckles. These people are considered to be pilgrims because a pilgrim is anyone who's traveling for a religious journey or for a religious purpose. And last year you learned about how people of the Muslim faith travel to Mecca, and they call that a pilgrimage, and that is just them traveling from one place to another for a religious purpose, which that is way different from the pilgrims that you learned about back in kindergarten, where they basically just tell you that all pilgrims come over and eat turkey and wear buckle hats. So it's a little bit different. Anyone can be a pilgrim as long as they are journeying for a religious purpose. And these people had originally agreed to settle in Virginia. They were going to be allowed to practice their religion freely. They would just have to give profits of anything that they made to the Virginia company, to the people that had already lived there. So technically, they're not really allowed to practice their religion freely. They're paying to practice their religion, but it's still better than what was happening in England, so they were willing to come over and take that risk. 102 people come over on the Mayflower, and only a small portion of them, about a third of them, were actual pilgrims looking for a better life for their religious purposes. The other part of the people coming over were really just coming over because they wanted to start their lives over. And they had originally planned to settle in that Virginia spot where the Virginia company was, but back then your boat doesn't have really good guidance systems. There's no GPS telling you where you're exactly located. You're basically at the mercy of the ocean and the wind. Wherever the ocean and the wind want to take you, that's where you're going to land. So they land well north of Virginia at what is basically Cape Cod today, and they called it Plymouth, and this is what would be like Plymouth Rock that you may have heard of before, where they landed from the Mayflower on Plymouth Rock. And before they decide that they're going to get off the boat and go onto land, they decide they need to make a rule book. They need to have a set of rules. They want to be able to have a civilized society where they cannot have just things run into chaos immediately, which, if you've ever read or seen Lord of the Flies, a story about kids crash landing onto a deserted island and chaos immediately ensues because there's no set of rules that everyone's going to follow. And this is once again key. They set up a representative government as a part of this Mayflower Compact. They decide they want to, once again, rep the pub. This is me getting a text message. They want to rep the pub. They want to be able to have a say in their government. They're not going to have that one person in charge. No more monarchies. They're going to be able to all say what they want the rules to be. They're going to work together as a society and collaborate in order to make the rules. And this is your next essay question 2 that you get to choose from. So number 1 was about how John Smith helped settlers survive in Jamestown. This is how Squanto helped, and the Native American tribe, the Wampanoag, helped the settlers survive in the north. There are hardships, which are not ships that are hard. They are things that are difficult to overcome. And during that first winter, a lot of the pilgrims die because of these 3 major difficulties: malnutrition, disease, and cold. And malnutrition is a problem because you would starve to death. There would be very little opportunities to grow food, especially in winter in the north. It snows a lot, it gets too cold, and crops don't grow. The soil is not the best for growing large crops, so you can't really get a surplus, which is extra food to keep throughout the winter. So this malnutrition stuff becomes a major problem. You don't know what you can eat yet. You don't know what's healthy, what's not, what's safe, what's poisonous, and you don't really know how to grow crops in large portions. So malnutrition was a major problem. Disease is another one where people would get sick all the time. The Europeans that were coming over to the New World were not exposed yet to a lot of the viruses and diseases in the Americas. And they had been exposed to diseases and viruses in Europe, and their bodies had built immunities to them over generations and generations. So when they come to the New World, they didn't have those immunities yet that would save them from these diseases and viruses. So instead of being able to fight them off themselves with their immune systems, they instead were starting to get sick and die. And the last one is very self-explanatory. They were freezing to death, which is something that you can experience here in our area of Pennsylvania, where every once in a while we get a polar vortex. And a couple of years ago we had a giant ice storm where if you don't have a house, if you don't have heat, if you don't have blankets and coats and a roof, and you're exposed to those elements, when it gets that cold, it's very easy to just freeze to death. So those 3 things, that malnutrition, disease, and cold, were becoming a major problem for the colonists in the north. And it's not until they meet Squanto and Samoset that they're able to survive. They're able to teach them, much like how John Smith helped the people in Jamestown survive. You have the people of the Wampanoag tribe helping show them how to plant and grow food, what foods you can grow, which foods and crops will survive in the north. You have them showing them where and how to hunt and fish properly. And they make friends, once again, throw it back to John Smith, with the Native American tribe. It's much better to have them work with you than against you. And this is where the Wampanoag and these Native American tribes and these Native Americans working with the pilgrims that have come over on the Mayflower, people that landed in the Cape Cod area, working together, that is what gives us the Thanksgiving that we know of today. King Charles, his persecution of those Puritans had them leave. So we have Puritans, we have Separatists. The Puritans come over and they get a royal charter to start north of Plymouth. So they're going a little bit even higher than the original people on the Mayflower did. And he's able to bring 900, John Winthrop, 900 people with him to Massachusetts Bay, where they will start their own company, the Massachusetts Bay Company. And they settle in what is present-day Boston. We're going to talk about Boston a lot as soon as we get to chapter 4 and 5, where they are basically the hotbed of the American Revolution, there where that fire starts. And these are the people that are their ancestors that start that war about 150 years later. And it's that he's able to bring 900 people because now people are starting to have the skills and the infrastructure to survive. And once they get set up, there's even more. 15,000 Puritans show up in Massachusetts in what they call the Great Migration. And migration just basically means move. So this is the Great Move, where people are coming over in droves. People are now being able to hear the stories of success. You're no longer just straight up disappearing like the people at Roanoke did. You are now able to survive. You are able to thrive. You're able to make money. And that is a much bigger incentive to get people to come over to the New World. Originally, the people in the Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay area, they were having rules made by just one guy, by John Winthrop. And eventually, people started to demand a larger role. They wanted to have that representative government. And eventually, they do allow them to have a representative government. They say that people can have power. The problem is that they didn't define people the same way we do today. They defined people as adult, male church members who owned property and also happened to be white. So throughout the year, we're going to talk about how they've changed the definition of people from what they originally said it was to what we know of as today. And every once in a while, when we get to voting rights, I'll write adult, white, male, who owned land and went to church. And that doesn't spell anything, which is unfortunate, but it kind of shows you the progress that we've made. Eventually, they'll cross off the church part, and you'll just have to be an adult white male who owns land. Then eventually this year we'll cross off the land part, and you just have to be an adult white male. Next year, when you start 9th grade social studies, they will cross off the white part, where you just have to be an adult male to be able to vote. That's after the Civil War. And then eventually, towards the end of 9th grade social studies, you guys will learn about the 1920s, where women gained the right to vote, and they will cross off the male part, and you just have to be an adult today to vote, which is kind of crazy that if you think about it, that there are women today who were alive, they were born without the right to vote, and right now they have the possibility to vote for the first woman president. Even though they were born in the time period where women didn't even have the opportunity to vote, they can be helping elect possibly the first ever woman president. And this is just a really interesting part at the very bottom, that you have Puritans not being tolerant of other religions. The Puritans came to the New World because they were being persecuted for their religious beliefs. They wanted to practice their own religion. They wanted to have freedom of religion. And now people that are settling near them are being told, if you're not a Puritan, you have to leave us alone, which is a very contradictory statement that they wanted that freedom of religion, and now that they have it for themselves, they're not willing to give it to other people. And when those people were not allowed to settle near the Puritans, those people started to spread out more around the surrounding area into Connecticut and Rhode Island. They even set up in this place the first real American Constitution, and the Constitution is a set of laws, and we're going to cover those vast majority of different constitutions and eventually end up with our Constitution, capital C, the U.S. Constitution, that we'll learn about this year in depth once we get to chapter 7 and 8, where it's our set of laws that we currently follow in our country and how those run our entire government. And eventually you get a guy named Roger Williams who goes to Rhode Island, which is not an island, which is really annoying, but it's called Rhode Island anyway. It is that smallest state. And here is where Roger Williams sets up belief systems that we still have today as a part of our government. The first being that government should not force religious beliefs on people. Today we have what we call separation of church and state, that our churches and our government cannot have laws that go with each other. So we cannot make any rules in our government that say you must follow certain religious beliefs. Those things are going to be separated. He also comes up with the novel idea that maybe we shouldn't just kill and take lands from Native Americans, that maybe instead we should buy them from them. We should share our resources with them. We should trade them certain things for land. We should buy it off of them. That way we're not being mean to them and just taking what was theirs. And then he also comes up with a policy, which a policy is a plan of religious toleration. They're going to accept, they're going to allow people of other religions to settle with them. Instead of being like the Puritans who are kicking people out and saying you may not settle near us, they are instead having people come and stay with them and say we will be accepting of all religions, which is supposed to be the American ideal, that we will accept you no matter what your belief systems are. And then finally we get to major conflict with Native Americans, where once the American colonists had started doing well, and if you think about it, they kind of came in, they landed on beaches, and then we start creeping our way further and further and further inland. And once the colonists get to the point where we have the 13 colonies today, they have taken over a large chunk of Native American land. And throughout the year, we're going to go from the beaches all the way across the entire continental United States to California, and that's kind of the American way of doing things, where it was just, we want your land, and we're going to keep taking more and more of it. And as they started creeping in further and further from the coastline, they started to fight different Native American tribes. And the way that would usually work is they went further than an eye for an eye punishment, where if you punch them, they punch you. You have a Native American tribe that kills 9 colonists, and in retaliation, the Connecticut militia burns their entire village to the ground, killing and basically wiping out that entire Native American tribe. And then similarly, the New England colonists end up teaming up and going to war with the Wampanoag people. And you may be saying, we've heard of the Wampanoag before. This was Squanto. This was the guy that helped them survive. This was his tribe. And now we're about 50 years later, where the Americans have used their knowledge to survive. They've used the Wampanoag skills in order to make themselves have better lives, and now instead they want the Wampanoag land, they want to expand and make more money, they're starting to get very greedy about what they want and how they can get it, and now they're willing to even fight and kill the people that originally helped them survive, and then they're going to just keep on spreading across throughout the rest of our year that we are about to learn about, all the way through the 16, 17, and 1800s until we have all the land in the continental United States.